the guys that have been running the show, maybe it hasn't been part of a nefarious plan. Maybe it's just more been sort of like I don't have a very good system here. I don't have a lot of great options, so I've got to take this extreme measure. The next guy who gets that says, oh my gosh, my options are even worse. I have to take even more extreme measures. And you just get to a point at which it can't be punted off anymore. And at some point, the reckoning's going to happen.
No, look, I think you bring two very important points that I'd like to elaborate on. The first one is this short-term versus long-term dilemma, right?
Yeah.
And this is, as you said, is very much human nature. It's not just politicians, right? We want to be super fit, but we also want to have the chocolate cake, right? Or we want to, is the short-term versus long-term, is the everything in life, studying versus having fun or whatever. And I think the issue here is, and the temptation and the problem is that many of the measures that are taken on a short-term basis are sold to us as temporary, right? As kind of extreme, everything, it kind of feels a little bit that, if you follow boxing, every other month there's the fight of the century, right? Which is kind of ridiculous. Because, you have that sort of hype that the last crisis is just this big emergency that requires us going all in with debt and spending. And effectively what you see is that these temporary measures, these extreme emergency measures become normalized and they become permanent. Think about pretty much anything that's happened, right? From all the way to taxes through obviously monetary policy, and how whatever, negative interest rates or even, MMT, but there's lots of things. QE is a good example, right? QE started out as this emergency measure, and it has become very much core. So I think the short-term, long-term dilemma it's a problem, but as you said, as we kick the can down the road and those emergency measures become more permanent, then it becomes you also subject to the law of diminishing returns. So, it's no longer enough to print 600 billion. You start doing things like QE infinity. Look at Europe, right? With the new TPI, right? You have a situation where how much you need to save Italy and Spain, and how much you need to prevent these yields from going. You're sort of getting into a situation where this thing becomes it perpetuates on itself. So this is the first dimension. The second issue associated with this is the fact that central banks, governments don't operate in a bubble, in isolation. They're effectively subject to other people's behaviors. And that's why I think currency wars and trade wars are so important and are a key part of monetary and fiscal. If I was to look, rewind a little bit and look at the situation in Europe, how did we get into a situation where we have negative nominal interest rates? It's such an aberration, so something so crazy. And to be honest, it starts from an ECB that was extremely orthodox, right? In the '08 crisis, and as Bernstein's was going down, Europe was hiking rates, and we're very focused on inflation and very paranoid about printing money because of our history, particularly in Germany. But then what happens is, the Fed and basically the UK and several other countries went very aggressively with QE, and effectively what happens is the euro appreciates significantly, right? So you lose a lot of competitiveness, arguably when you need it the most. And this is, if you think about what happened between the euro and the dollar, which went all the way to 150, you have a situation where it's not just Europe losing competitiveness versus the US. It was also losing competitiveness versus China, which was pegged against the dollar. So what happened in 2012, in my view, is the European crisis we suffered was in some ways related to this issue where other people were exporting their problems. They're transferring those problems through currency wars, right? They are effectively benefiting from these things. And what it does is someone like Mario Draghi walks in and says, guys, I'll do whatever it takes, obviously to save the euro, but I also want to compete and defend myself. And so negative interest rates are only explained on a relative basis. yeah, to put it differently, we would have never ever had negative interest rates had the Fed been at 2%. We went negative because the Fed was at zero. So it's a relative game. You want to devalue your currency. You're trying to effectively not just defend yourself, but also counterattack. And this is it's almost like the nuclear escalation, right? As everybody was building nuclear heads, then other people had to build them, and it got to this point of mutually assured destruction. And I think there's some parallels with monetary policy, where as everyone keeps, trying to print their way out, and you might sell it as a domestic issue, but in practice it has also foreign implications, and people defend themselves. This gets us all into these dynamics, which ultimately lead to trade wars. It leads to, okay, you want to devalue by 20%, I'll tariff you by 20%, okay? And these things are all, again, we're not solving problems, they are effectively eventually enlarging them. So I think the combination of the short-term, long-term human nature and what it means in terms of, again, making not under my reign, sort of kick the can, and all these temporary measures that become more permanent, have also implications on a broader base with other players in the game, and this makes things ever so more complicated.
If you enjoyed this video clip, click here to watch another one you should like.